So first of all, you come up with your hypothesis. How do you do that? You say, well, this environment, the Pleistocene, posed certain problems. Natural selection produces these little modular mechanisms to deal with these problems. And because males and females have different problems, they came up with different adaptive mechanisms. So here are some of the examples that you get from David Buss. And you'll be able to, if you think about it, you'll be able to go, okay, which problem is this, or which sex is this a problem for? Paternity uncertainty is not a female problem, right? You know your own baby because it comes out of your body. But for males, it's more of a problem because, unless they've been keeping a very close eye on the female mates, they may not be absolutely sure that any given child is their own. Identifying reproductively valuable women, clearly another problem for males. Getting sexual access to women, another problem for males. Identifying men who are able to invest, right? So the idea here is that what females are looking for, and this should sound like it has a cultural resonance, right? What females are looking for is a male mate who will stick with them and help them raise their young, right? And so you've got this problem of identifying men who are able to invest and then men who are willing to invest. Now, all of these should sound like they resonate with our cultural norms. Yes, these in a sense don't seem surprising. And maybe we'd say, well, they shouldn't seem surprising, right? If the idea is that these evolved and we are now living with these evolutionary traits, they shouldn't seem surprising. We'll see. Okay, so that's coming up with our hypotheses. Then because there are these little modules, that's the theory, we've got these little mental modules that are solving these problems. So we operationalize these programs, these little modules, so that we can make a questionnaire, for instance, and test it in a population. Ideally, we do these two things. I'm not going to talk about them, although they're interesting just for the sake of time. So just briefly, here's a recent example from Cell 2B and Cosmides, right? So they've got this idea that there's an anger program, right? And we've got this trait of being angry, and they say, look, anger is this evolved program designed to resolve conflicts in favor of the angry individual by assessing and asserting their bargaining power in relation to the target of their anger, the person they're angry at. And so the idea here is that certain types of individuals are going to tend to get angrier more easily because they have the power to confer advantage or inflict a cost on the individual they're getting angry at. So attractive people can confer benefits because attractive means reproductively healthy, which means, you really want to have sex with them, right? That's what attractive means. Or everyone loves them because they're attractive, and so you want to get in with that group, right? That's basically what attractive means. And inflicting costs here means strong individuals, folks who can thump people, right? So you don't, basically, people who are strong are going to be more likely to get angry at people who are weak, right? So strong men and attractive women are more prone to anger. I thought about this when I read this, and I thought, so basically the thesis is that jocks are jerks and pretty girls are bitches, right? That's what it boils down to, isn't it? Okay, what do? They operationalize this in a questionnaire, ask you how you get angry. They take photos of you to assess your attractiveness and ask you whether you yourself think that you're comparatively attractive. Then they ask undergrads at University of California, Santa Barbara. They first asked a bunch of men who were members of gym, and then they asked the general undergraduate population. And strangely enough, they got confirmation of their results. Okay, so what's going on here? So this is why neuroevolutionary psychology is necessarily circular. And this is why Tinbergen can show us how. Tinbergen, super smart guy, talking about the behavior of various non-human animals. He said, look, we asked this question as scientists. Why does this organism behave the way it does? Why does this bird sing the song it does? When we ask that one question, in fact, we're really asking 4 questions. They're kind of interrelated, but you can parse them out in 4 different ways. You can be asking about efficient causation. So you say, why does this bird sing the song it does? Efficient causation is seeing what stimulates the bird to sing that song. Seeing what parts of the bird's throat are involved, what parts of the bird's brain are involved with singing that song. So that's one question we could be asking. We could be asking a question about the ontogeny of the organism or its development. So what about that organism's developmental history made it able to sing that song? Right? There's some really interesting early developmental research that was done on what kinds of stimulus early on, even in the egg, that some birds need in order to sing the right song at the end of the day, right? So there can be a developmental question. It's like a learning question. Sometimes learning is part of it anyway. So that's the other thing we could be asking. Immediate stimulus, or what about the history of the organism? Another question we could be asking is about survival value. So why does this bird sing this song? What does it do for the bird, right? How does it help it in its current environment, right? How does it help it to survive now? And then the final question is the evolutionary question, right? And so what is it about the history of that organism over evolutionary time, the natural selection history, the genetic drift history, the whole history of that organism over time that leads organisms of that type to sing that song? These are 4 different questions, though they're interrelated. Now, the first 3 questions we can directly, empirically investigate, right? We can just go into the field, we can cut up little birds, we can see what's going on. Right? But the 4th question, you can't, right? The only way you can answer the evolution question is by looking at the other 3 questions, right? And trying to say, well, you know, how might have this mechanism evolved, right? You know, we can see this mechanism. How might this organism have come to have this developmental history? Does the current survival value tell us about the past survival value, right? It may or it may not, right? They're 2 different things. Importantly, though, the only way you're going to get any traction on the evolution question is by looking at those first 3 questions. You might think, well, you know, if we're thinking about humans and why we evolved a certain behavior, you can look at other primates. But you can't do that if you're a narrow evolutionary psychologist, because you think everything that's interesting happened in the Pleistocene, right? And that's after we diverged from chimpanzees. Okay. So, what that means is it means that evolutionary hypotheses necessarily depend on observation of contemporary behavior and not much else, right? So, what is NEP doing, right? NEP is thinking about this evolutionary behavior, right? Again, they say, you sort of imagine the evolutionary past. You imagine these problems our ancestors have and what they could have evolved to deal with that problem. But the only way you can imagine that is by looking at the current state of affairs and what people are doing right now. So they think they're thinking about the evolutionary past, but they can only do that by using what they see around them in the contemporary world. So, so you look at your contemporary behavior, you have to come up with hypotheses, then you operationalize the behavior, and then lo and behold, you find studies you find that behavior in the population, right? So you can see how this is circular, right? It's necessarily circular. The only way you can come up with the evolutionary hypothesis is by looking at the current behavior. And so you come up with your evolutionary hypothesis, and lo and behold, when you operationalize it, do an experiment, you find the same behavior that you assumed at the beginning, right? It has to be circular. That's what Tinbergen shows us. There's nothing else you can do. So NEP, all it can do is make folk observations, then do studies that verify that people, again, we're talking here undergraduates and gym members, behave the way they've been observed to behave, right? But they take this methodological detour through evolution, right? And by taking that detour through evolution, they get to say, and it's innate, and it's universal, right? So you say, we behave the way we behave, we've observed that we behave the way we behave, but it's also innate, universal, because it's evolutionary. And you can see how there's a kind of a sleight of hand going on.